Hello, everyone, and welcome to Codefinger, a ransomware threat from within. We first became aware of this threat last week on January 13th, and so we put our internal threat laboratory, Casimir Labs, on it as soon as possible to collect as much information as they could get their hands on the threat. We'd like to share that with you today. My name is Connor Parkinson. I'm a product manager here at Cloud Storage Security, and I'm here with Velazar, who is the customer success manager, also here at CSS. We'll give you a quick brief of the Codefinger threat. The way that this attacker or this group of attackers, dubbed Codefinger, like to do things is first they look for AWS credentials. There's a number of ways they can go about doing that. The most popular and frankly the most likely are phishing and social engineering. There's a number of other ways that we'll go into. There's data breaches, publicly committed credentials in a public repository, so on and so forth. But the first thing they need to do is get access to your AWS account before they can start causing damage. Second thing they're going to do is they're going to look for AWS keys with get and put object permissions for Amazon S3. They're going to simulate permissions. They're going to do everything they can to get in there and find these permissions so that they can go ahead and encrypt the files using AWS SSEC. AWS SSEC, or server-side encryption with customer-provided keys, is a special type of encryption that allows customers to store the key locally so that they don't have to maintain any sort of code for encryption or decryption. The problem about that is that when these attackers encrypt files using SSEC and they run away with that code, there's no way that you can recover your files without paying a ransom and having them give you the code. They'll also go in and they'll set an S3 lifecycle policy rule. These rules are completely benign usually. They're designed to help customers get rid of files that they haven't been using, save on costs, so on and so forth. These attackers will actually set a policy to delete these files in 7 days unless the ransom is paid. The final thing they're going to do is they're going to leave a ransom note. This ransom note is going to have a couple things in it. We'll actually give you an example of what a ransom note looks like in just a couple minutes, but they're going to give you a Bitcoin address, and they're basically going to tell you that if you mess with permissions, negotiations will stop. I'd like to map these attacks to the attack lifecycle. We think it matches up pretty well. As you can see, the initial compromise is when this attacker or attackers originally get into your cloud environment. They establish a foothold. Maybe they elevate permissions by finding AWS access keys. And then they move laterally by finding more keys, and so on and so forth. And then when they complete their mission, they go ahead and encrypt the files, trigger the ransomware event, and then demand a ransom.
So when it comes to this type of attack, the cornerstone of it is leaked credentials. And usually that will happen through phishing, social engineering, or even some type of malware like a Trojan or keylogger getting onto a machine that is used by someone accessing an AWS account. Usually social engineering and phishing are two big ways here as well, where an unsuspecting employee will receive an email or receive even a phone call from someone that is pretending to be from possibly IT or just someone else from your team that needs access, and they'll fall for it. Additionally, like Connor mentioned, there are some other ways like credentials being hard-coded and that code being leaked publicly in a public repo like GitHub. Additionally, disgruntled employees is another source of credentials being compromised, where an employee may leave and their access was not properly revoked during that time, and they go back and they want to cause malice. So usually it comes from compromised credentials, and that's where it all starts. So once someone gets access to your AWS account, they will try to grab keys and check for permissions to see whether or not get object and put object calls are allowed. So usually they'll go into IAM, they'll check roles and policies. They might try simulating permissions as well as using tools like Paku that can show you where there are permissions and perform reconnaissance to have you see where you can use these types of permissions. So once they get access, they'll be able to check if the account that they're using has the permission to perform these types of calls. And then from there, we will get into actually encrypting files, encrypting objects in buckets. Now, all it really takes is a few AWS CLI commands where you will set a specific form of encryption. In this case, it's using AES 256, which we'll see in a few minutes as well. And you're encrypting the object. You're keeping the key to decrypt the object locally, and then you're leaving the victim with just encrypted objects and eventually a ransom note as well, which we'll see here shortly. Now, as Connor mentioned, lifecycle rules are a big piece of this, and that is what sets a timer for the victim to comply, or else they'll lose everything. So what will happen is the threat actor will set the lifecycle rule to delete files automatically after a number of days, let's say 7 days. And if the victim doesn't comply, those files will be lost. And if they don't pay the ransom, they won't get the key, so they won't be able to access the objects at all. And finally, you have the ransom note. Usually this will be the only accessible object in the bucket that has been compromised. And it'll give you some instructions around what to do, where to send payment to, and it'll usually say that if you don't comply, then you will lose all your objects. All right, so when it comes to lifecycle rules, AWS allows these out of the box to help you manage objects that may not be used. In this case, though, the attackers will apply a lifecycle rule to all of your objects, and they'll just permanently delete everything. They'll expire current objects, current versions of objects, and permanently delete non-current versions of objects as well. So they'll set this for a specific number of days, let's say 7 across the board. And once this is set, your objects will be expired and deleted if that lifecycle rule is not applied. And a lot of the time, this lifecycle rule will be turned on, and you may not even notice it because you're so focused on the threat of your objects in your bucket that you may not go over to the management section to check for lifecycle rules. So if you are ever a victim of this type of attack, make sure to certainly go check the management section of your S3 bucket to check if there is a lifecycle rule. At the very least, you can remove that lifecycle rule. So that countdown, that timer will be stopped. That way you don't lose your objects. All right, so as you can see here, we're in a bucket. We have a couple of files in here. If we click into one of them and we scroll down, you'll be able to see this file is encrypted. And if we try and download it, in this case, we will get this error here that says that there is encryption on the object. So we are able to access it without the key to retrieve the object. Now, this can happen to one object, or it can be applied to all of your objects in a bucket. And as you can see here, in this case, we also have a text file here that is looks like a ransom note. And this is exactly what it could look like here. So let's go ahead and see how we can simulate this type of attack here in our terminal. Pull up a new window. And we'll do a couple of things here. We'll go ahead and first we will want to create a key. So we can do something like open SSL, open SSL, and we can output a key to a file. And then what we'll want to do is set a variable for that key. And we'll want a base 60 for it. And then if we echo that key, there it is. From here, we can take that and MD5 hash it. So I'll do something like key MD5, and I'll just add a 1 to differentiate. And we'll want to use OpenSSL again. And base 60 for it. And if we echo our key MD5, there is our MD5 hash. So we've got our key details set up. What we need to do from here is, in this case, instead of writing a already pre-existing object in the bucket, writing encryption to that object, or I should say applying encryption to that object, we'll just go ahead and we'll create a new object. I'm just going to add, we'll call it, we have my file 1 and 2 already, we'll call it my file 3. And we'll go ahead and add it in. Oop. And from here, we can use the S3 API to upload that object. So we want to add it into our bucket. Our bucket is SSE-C-CSS-test. We called it myfile3.txt. And after this, we want to define the algorithm we're going to use. So in this case, it's AES 256. And finally, we want to apply the key here. So we'll do key. And we want to apply the MD5 hash. So we'll do customer key MD5, and then key MD5, and we called that MD5 1. And then finally, we just want to define which profile we're using and let it run. So our command has run. It looks like it has written the object to the bucket. It looks like it has applied encryption to the object, as you can see. If we go back to our bucket and we refresh, there's our object here. In this case, it's my file 3. If we click into it, you'll be able to see the same exact encryption applied. Specifically, I should say, customer provided encryption key. And if we download it, we still won't be able to access it. So this is what it's essentially going to look like from both your side as a victim of this type of attack, as well as from the attacker side. It's as simple as a few AWS CLI commands and just getting a hold of your login details. So it's definitely a different type of ransomware, and it's a scary one because if this happens to you, if this happens to your organization, it might happen across many buckets. I mean, we only did it just to a single file in one bucket. This could impact thousands of buckets, hundreds of buckets, and millions of objects. And you're going to just be left with a ransom note at the end of the day and a ransom to pay. So it's certainly something that's just very easy to do. Yeah, and that's about it. So let's talk about how to protect yourself. The biggest protection against ransomware is backups. Having proper backups enabled for your S3 buckets, where you can either backup data offline or backup data to a different tier of AWS, is the best way to protect yourself against this type of threat, because you can be certain that you have a copy of that data to recover from. Additionally, disabling customer provided keys, disabling SSE-C can help, because in that case, your user account, your organization even, won't have the permission to use customer provided keys on objects in S3. And then, since this attack starts with credentials, doing basic password stuff like swapping out passwords every so often, and especially enabling 2FA on your AWS accounts, is crucial. In addition to that, using things like SSO to avoid having to use username and password is crucial as well. And finally, enabling lifecycle event notifications. If you aren't an organization that utilizes lifecycle events or lifecycle rules, I should say, you can enable notifications on those types of rules to get alerted if someone adds those types of rules to your bucket or set of buckets, because that is a large portion of this attack.
Absolutely. Thanks, Elazar. We're going to drill into prevention and detection. The number one thing you can do, Elazar said it, I just want to bring it up again, are backups. And you especially want to make sure that in this case, they're offline. It's entirely possible that an attacker, if they compromise your buckets, they might stumble upon an access key that lets them go in and encrypt the backups as well. And in that case, there's really nothing you can do except for pay the ransom. We'll start and we'll kind of drill back into some prevention measures. We talk about credential rotation, strong password policy, including MFA, 2FA, whatever you can do to get more layers of defense between your environment and the attacker, the better. We also suggest that you implement IAM controls, principle of least privilege. So regular audits are key for this. You want to make sure that everybody only has the permissions they need to be able to do their job. You need to make sure that you're removing unused permissions or unneeded permissions according to best practices, AWS well architected, the list goes on. But these audits are extremely important. And we also suggest that you use temporary security credentials like IAM roles instead of creating long-term credentials like access keys. AWS's own documentation suggests that create IAM roles instead of keys whenever possible. Something short-term. That's way easier to keep track of rather than a rogue access key kind of laying around somewhere that an attacker can go find and then leverage against you. Going on to detection, you got to monitor AWS CloudTrail logs. If you see thousands upon thousands of objects being encrypted with SSE-C, it's likely that something's wrong. Same with lifecycle policies. You see thousands of objects that are set to delete in 7 days suddenly, that's another good sign that there's something fishy going on in your environment. A way that you can do this is to use anomaly detection tools. It makes it a lot easier parsing through thousands, tens of thousands of CloudTrail. CloudTrail logs is something that's pretty difficult, but anomaly detection tools can kind of automate that and do that for you. Moving on to recovery and education. Again, can't stress it enough, maintaining online or offline backups, excuse me. As much as possible, make sure they're as secure as possible so that if your data does get encrypted, if this does happen to your organization, you have a way out. You have a way to kind of preserve that business critical, that customer, that sensitive information to kind of reduce as much strain on your production and your operations in the cloud as possible. Again, we've talked about this a lot lately, but attackers are moving towards data. They're moving towards storage in the cloud. More and more data comes into the cloud every year. It becomes dispersed over a larger amount of storage repositories, buckets, volumes, file systems, so on and so forth. So you need to kind of implement that. You need to consider that shift in focus in your incident response planning. And the final thing that we always suggest, we're always big on, is education. We suggest no less than twice a year, preferably quarterly, training teams on secure coding practices to avoid hard-coded credentials, reducing human error, phishing, social engineering tactics, anything that you can do to train your employees to kind of prevent and mitigate these threats will allow you to reduce human error by an order of magnitude or more. So how does cloud storage security help? We provide malware protection for the entirety of your organization's storage suite. So right now, we have coverage for Amazon S3, EBS, EFS, FSX, Microsoft Azure Blob, and Google Cloud Storage. We offer simple program-based pricing to lock everything down at one flat rate. So you don't have to worry about license usage. You don't have to worry about per gigabyte pricing, unexpected increases in costs month over month. Our mission is to truly allow organizations to be as secure as they can be, locking down every single bucket, every single storage repository, making sure that when malware gets in there, it's caught and it's removed before it's distributed to your downstream users. Thank you so much for attending, everyone. If you'd like to learn more about the Codefinger attacks, or you want to talk about our malware protection solution, you can reach out to sales@cloudstorage.com right up there on your screen. Another alternative is to head to AWS Marketplace and kick off a 30-day free trial. Get 100 gigabytes of free scanning so you can figure out, okay, does this solution work for me? You can get it protecting buckets. You can baseline some data as well if you think that you might have been compromised. You can go in there and deploy in 15 minutes or less and truly get started today. Thanks everyone again for attending, and have a great rest of your day.
Thanks, everybody.